Okay, good evening, everyone. By my clock, it is 6:15, so it's 6:15 here on the Pacific Coast. So I want to be respectful of everybody's time, and we're going to go ahead and get started. This seminar is being recorded, so if you're here with us live and you want to go back and look at it later, it'll be available through the Canvas site, and certainly if you're joining us later, you'll be able to watch it. So first and foremost, I really want to thank all of you for sharing with me your visions, your concept, your goals. I personally find it really helpful to know exactly what each of you are working towards, both short-term and long-term. And I also hope that the exercise helped you think through, and think through what it is that you want to do. I hope that it helped to clarify your thinking about your business and where you plan to take the business. One thing that many of you mentioned in your vision plans was the knowledge that though you want to start up the business of your dreams, what you are going to most likely have to start up with initially might be a smaller version of that dream business. And so by that, I mean you may want to one day own a brick and mortar bakery, but you realize based off of where you are in your life right now, based off of where your personal financial situation is, you're going to most likely start out of your home. Or you want to open up a pub or a restaurant in several years, but in the meantime are thinking about how you can start on a smaller scale now. And starting gradually in this manner, if you find yourself in this situation, it can be a huge asset to you for several reasons. First of all, it enables you to really take the time, stop, and think through the steps necessary to get that bigger component of the business up and running. And that's really important, especially if you're looking at a larger capital outlay, like building out a storefront or building out a production facility. Second of all, the time that it gives you time to actually pull those financials together. So if there isn't a big capital outlay, you actually have time to, figure out how you're going to, round the wagon, so to speak, and get the financials, get the funding and capital that you need to move forward in the manner that you want to move forward in. And lastly, it also gives you time to really test your recipes, make sure that you understand who your target market is and their desires, and then ultimately, by taking a little bit of time, it gives you a chance to start to build a loyal following now, and that can be invaluable as you grow. So I'm going to actually tell kind of a quick story to kind of illustrate this point for you, and one thing you guys will notice is that I do love to tell stories, so I hope you don't mind, but I will share stories from time to time. So there's an entrepreneur here in Seattle, or there's a food business here in Seattle called Hotcakes. Amber, who started Hotcakes, she actually started as a farmer's market business. Now, she had been a pastry chef working for another company, left that company, started up as a farmer's market business. And she worked, a couple farmer's markets around the Seattle metro area for a number of years. And then, decided that next step was growing into a storefront. So as she pulled the financials together, she pulled the business plan together, all of that stuff, and starts building out the storefront and thought that she was golden. But if any of you have ever done a construction project, either a personal construction project or a commercial construction project, you know that things have a way of going over budget and going over time. And that's exactly what happened in Amber's case. So in order to fill the gap between where her financials, the capital that she had ended and what she needed to finish the project, she ended up doing a Kickstarter campaign. And we're going to talk more about Kickstarters and other crowdfunding as well as other funding options when we start talking about the financials in the next section of this course. But in a nutshell, she did a Kickstarter campaign. One of the reasons her Kickstarter campaign was successful was because she already had this loyal built-in following of Seattleites, people who wanted to help her. She had a mailing list that she was able to send out to and say, hey, I'm doing a Kickstarter. Would you take a look at it? Would you help if you have the means? She already had a built-in audience and a built-in people who trusted her and truly who wanted to help see her succeed. So that is one of the reasons that her Kickstarter was successful, and that then she was able to put that money towards finishing out the storefront, and now she has a beautiful, very fun storefront. I say fun because one of the things they're well known for is milkshakes that have booze in them, which in the middle of winter, surprisingly, are very good, especially on a Friday night. She has a very successful brick and mortar store. So all of that is just to illustrate that it's not uncommon for a food entrepreneur, even one like her who she had a background in food and had experience working in the food industry, that you might not be able to take your business, necessarily to the 100% mark just yet. So then break it down and say, okay, what are the steps that I'm going to do in the next year and the next couple of years so that I can ultimately move towards that goal of, that bigger goal, whether it's a brick and mortar store, whether it's selling into Whole Foods nationwide, what steps do I need to take between now and then? So before I get into tonight's seminar, are there any questions? Does anybody have any questions? Anything? Is everybody really quiet again tonight? I hope not. Okay, well, feel free to let me know if you have questions. The best way is to type something into the kind of the I am bar over on the right hand side of the screen. Most likely what ends up happening is I probably won't stop in the middle of the presentation, but I will go back at the end of the presentation and make sure that any questions get addressed. So going into today, so if you had a chance to look at this week's material already, you know that this week is essentially all about paperwork, which doesn't that sound like fun? The goal of this week is to give you an understanding of some of the permits and licenses that you're going to need in order to operate a food business legally, as well as insight into where you can and cannot produce your food products. Now, again, I realize that we have some folks who are coming into this program with no food business background. We have others who are already up and running in one form or another. So, I ask those of you who, you are up and running just to bear with us over this week, because starting next week, we're going to jump into talking about target marketing and SWOT analysis and all of that good stuff. But I wanted to make sure that this piece was up front, because this tends to be the biggest stumbling block for a lot of people and the biggest hurdle of, well, how am I actually going to produce this product legally? So that's why I wanted to put it in the beginning here, so that those of you who haven't started up businesses can start to think through these steps. And in the assignment this week, you will be thinking through the steps of, what is it going to be required to legally produce your product. So before I get too deep into tonight's seminar, I do want to make one thing very clear. This is a huge disclaimer. I am not a business attorney. I am not a CPA. I bring this up because when it comes to questions about business entity, so how, should he file as an LLC, should he file as a sole proprietor, I simply cannot answer those questions. One, because I don't have the legal qualifications to be able to answer those questions. I do not have the tax insight to be able to answer those questions. I also don't have insight into your personal financials to be able to answer those questions correctly. Because how you set up your business entity is going to have an impact on your personal taxes and also the taxes for the business. So this is where having a good business attorney or a CPA that you trust really is worth their weight in gold. And you'll hear me talk about, CPAs kind of, especially as we start talking about the financials. I mean, I personally feel that a CPA is kind of the first hire that you should make. I'm not recommending that you necessarily bring somebody in-house, but find a good CPA, find a good accountant that you trust, that you can start asking these questions of, and make sure that you are getting your business started off on the right foot. You want someone on your team who understands the law, understands how the choices of how you choose to file your business. Again, are you a sole proprietor? Are you an S Corp? How that will have an impact on your personal taxes, and they can provide you guidance so that you make the best decision for your business life, but also for your personal life from a legal and tax standpoint. So again, I can't answer questions about which business entity is best for me, and so I just want to be very clear about that. The information that you find on the site, the videos and the readings for this week are really meant to be a starting point for you. One thing I have found in working with food entrepreneurs over the years is that sometimes it's this, you don't even know which questions to ask. So even if you had a great CPA that you could talk to or a great business attorney, you don't even know which questions to ask. So the material from this week is really to give you an overview so that you can then talk with that CPA, talk to that business attorney, and know which questions to ask. So while I can't say what type of business entity you should set your business up as, I will say that without exception, all of you are going to have to file some sort of business licenses. And when I'm talking about business licenses right now, I'm talking about your state business licenses and your city and or county. And again, it's going to be different for each of you depending on where you live, and the costs are going to be all over the place. So unfortunately, I cannot sit here and say the costs are going to be X because it's different. Even here in Seattle, it's different from the town that's just north of us, what our city licenses cost annually. So one of your assignments this week is actually going to be doing research based off of your location. What state permits do I need to file? And again, we're talking business licenses. So the business licenses are those licenses that any business is going to have to fill out, whether you are a mechanic, a beautician, a food business, a consulting company. It doesn't matter. We're not talking about health permits just yet. So what we're going to be looking for is what state licenses are you going to have to file, and how much are those going to cost you? And then also, are there city and or county licenses that you also might be required to file? And what are the associated costs with those going to be? These are all startup costs that you need to be aware of as you get your business up and running. Again, I do realize that some of you have already done this. If nothing else, my recommendation is, even if you have your business started already, just go back and make sure that you know exactly how much it cost you to file for those licenses and permits, because as we move into the financials, we're going to be using those as part of your startup expenses. So for this week, we're really focusing on, in addition to kind of those business licenses, we're focusing on the production aspect of operating a food business. And there are really two avenues when it comes to production that we need to focus on. The first is the where, and the second is the how. Now, again, if you have had a chance to look at this material, if you looked at it early in the week, you may have noticed that I actually put some additional material up there. And the additional material was specifically about the how part of production. How do I manage operations? How do I manage actually the production of the product? And that all came about because so many of you had asked that question of me, either personally, in the office hours, or had talked about it in your vision statements and in your goal statements. So I wanted to make sure to include some information for you to review for this week. And I bring up that point because I do want to illustrate that I am really trying to morph this course around what each of you needs and wants to get out of this course. So again, as we move forward, if there is stuff that, if there are burning questions that you have that you're not seeing addressed, let me know. And if I'm hearing it from multiple people, I'm going to turn around and get something up on the site for all of you so that everybody can view it or read it. So starting with the where part of the equation. So where are you actually going to produce your product? A lot of you have already indicated that you already have an idea of where you are going to produce your product. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but I do want to spend the next couple minutes just talking to kind of complement the reading that we have for this week, talking about some of the options that are available to you. Because, as all of you already know, food businesses have a whole lot more complex permitting issues than, let's say, your average clothing boutique. If you have a clothing boutique, you don't have to worry about getting health permits. But unfortunately for food businesses, we not only have our city and state and or county business licenses, but we also have one or more health permits that you are typically going to be required to get. And you're hearing me throw in all of these kind of conditional statements like typically and usually. And again, that's because every state, every city, every county operates a little bit differently. So I can't 100% say like each of you, you're going to have to file for this. I'm going to try and give you a broad overview, give you an understanding of what you need to be looking for as you look for which health permits you need to be filing for your business. So starting with the home-based businesses. In most states, right now in the U.S., not all, in most states, there is some form of home-based food production which is allowed, which means that you can legally use your home kitchen to produce products that you sell to consumers. So briefly, because again, I know a lot of this is in the reading, some of the things to keep in mind if the idea of working out of your home kitchen appeals to you. First and foremost is this allowed in your state? Is this allowed in your city? And lastly, even if it's allowed in the other two, if let's say you're in an area that has a homeowners association, there may be, they may prohibit home-based businesses. So you need to look at all of those pieces, kind of from the statewide, the citywide, the countywide, but also, kind of right down to your neighborhood and see if it's going to be allowed. Secondly, you want to figure out, are there restrictions on the types of products you can produce? Because in almost every case, in almost every state, there is that allows cottage food businesses, which is what a home-based kitchen rules are typically referred to as. They're also known as baker's bills. But in almost all of the states, there are restrictions on products that can be produced. So as an example, you can't produce meat products at your own kitchen as to consumers. A lot of these are called baker's bills for a reason, because usually the products that are allowed are things that a baker would make. So your breads, your muffins, your cupcakes, those type of things. Because cottage food laws are mandated on a state level, it's something important to know. They're on a state-by-state level. They are not on a national level. The products that are allowed in one state may not be allowed in another state. As a pastry chef, it irks me a little bit that here in Washington State, we are not allowed to make caramels out of our home kitchen, but just to the south of us in Oregon, any of you guys can, which, I mean, kudos to you. So you have to take a look at your state's regulations, and don't just randomly look and say, oh, well, in Wisconsin they're allowed to do this, I would probably be allowed to do it too. Another thing to take a look at is, are there revenue restrictions? Because again, in most states, there is a revenue cap that is in effect with these home-based food businesses. So there might be a $25,000 cap, there might be a $50,000 cap, there might be a $10,000 cap, or I've seen even less. I've seen $5,000. And in a lot of these states, here's the key thing, in a lot of these states that cap is gross revenue, not net revenue. The difference being that gross revenue is before you have taken out any of your expenses. So if your limit is $10,000 and that's a gross revenue limit, the reality is it's not like you are going to have $10,000 in profit. You're going to have to take your expenses out of there. So you might end up at the end of the day netting only, $1,000 or $2,000. So you have to determine if there are revenue restrictions, is working out of your home-based kitchen still the right step for you? Also take a look at what permits are you going to need to legally operate. In most states, you're going to also need to have some form of health or food handlers permit, so that you have gone through a course that teaches you how to safely handle food. In other times, you're going to be working with the department, well, either or, you'll be working with the Department of Agriculture. So it's oftentimes the Department of Agriculture who is actually mandating these cottage food laws, and it is not necessarily your county health. So if you're going to your county health department this week and you're not finding any information about home-based food businesses, my next recommendation is go take a look at your Department of Agriculture, or whatever it is called in your state. Sometimes it's called Department of Health and Human Services. Go take a look at those websites and see if you can find the information about cottage food businesses for your state. And then lastly, are there any other regulations that might come into effect? For example, I think it's Pennsylvania, their cottage food law says that if you have pets or children in the home, if you actually want to start a home-based business, you're going to have to find a way to get rid of them. And I mean permanently. You're not allowed to have kids or pets in the home and operate a home-based food business. Again, in Washington State, we have very specific wording of what has to go onto labels if you're operating a home-based food business. And I'm not talking about a nutrition facts label. These are specific words that indicate to the consumer that this is produced in a home-based kitchen. So there might be some very specific regulations that will apply to you if you are operating a home-based food business. Moving on to commercial kitchens, you have a couple different options. You can certainly rent or build out your own kitchen space. And this is where you're going to be in compliance with the health department. And in fact, if you're going to go this route, my recommendation really is to start working with the health department, either your county health department, or depending on what product you're making, you might fall under like a Department of Ag. Start working with them from the beginning. See if you can ultimately have a consultant who can help you through that process, help you understand exactly what needs to be in place in terms of, okay, the hood and the Ansel system and the 3-basin sink. have somebody help you through that unless you yourself are very familiar with that, or unless you have hired an architect who is very familiar with that process. You also have the option now of these incubator kitchens. I don't know if any of you guys have heard about these, or these shared kitchen spaces. And what these are basically bigger kitchens where you will then, they rent out usually on kind of a weekly, certain hourly basis to food entrepreneurs. So you might, as an example, have 15 hours a week in this kitchen. And when you're not using that workspace, that 15 hours a week, other entrepreneurs are using them. What makes kind of incubator kitchens and shared kitchens interesting is that usually it's not just one workstation. Usually there's going to be multiple workstations, which is kind of nice because it does mean that you're not necessarily going to be working alone unless you have chosen to work the graveyard shift and there's nobody else, no other businesses in there. But it is a great way to get into kitchen space a little more, commercial kitchen space, a little more cost effectively than having your own kitchen, but also having other people around you, you know, again, the community idea, the brainstorming idea, having these folks around you to help you grow your business. And then lastly, you can also rent space in another's kitchen. I mean this differently from a shared kitchen or an incubator kitchen. By this I mean, I know folks who rent bakeries spaces. So when the bakery closes, let's say at 2 or 3, businesses, other food businesses come in and operate out of those spaces. I also know people who use a lot of caterers. If caterers have their own kitchen, typically caterers do not need that space unless they're very busy. They don't necessarily need that space all the time, and so may rent out space on their slower days to other food entrepreneurs. If you're looking at, you know, if you've decided that based off of what your business is and where you want to go, going into commercial kitchens is right for you, some of the things to keep in mind. First of all, operating out of a commercial kitchen, you are not going to be falling under those restrictions of the home-based food business. So there's going to be little to no restrictions on what products you can make in your kitchen. What permits you need might change, but there is going to be little restrictions on what products you make as long as you're in a commercial kitchen. There is also going to be no revenue cap. In fact, you know, your state government is going to want you to make as much money as possible because then they get more tax revenue from it. So you're not going to fall under those regulations. But some of the things for you to keep in mind. First of all, what are the hours that you have access to the kitchen, and does that actually jive with your schedule, and not only your personal schedule, but also like your operations schedule. You know, we're talking a little bit about the how piece of production today. Well, those hours that you have access to the kitchen, does that make sense for the product you're trying to produce, for the steps that you have to take in order to produce that product? Also, I always recommend as you go into sort of check out these kitchens, how clean is it? What is the policy on cleanliness? Do they hire a company? Is it a kind of a co-op effort for cleaning? Neither one is right, neither one is wrong. But just when you walk in there, I always say it's kind of the sticky shoe on the floor test. Like, does your shoe stick to the floor? And if so, you know, you definitely want to be asking them about cleanliness and how is the facility kept clean, and why is your shoe sticking to the floor? Maybe something just spilled, or maybe this is how it always is. You also want to take a look at availability of equipment. So do they have that big 60-quart mixer that you're really hoping for? You know, just because they don't, some other things may outweigh it, and you may decide, well, I'll just make multiple batches in a 20-quart mixer. You know, but take a look. Do they have, if you're going to be baking product, do they have ovens? Like, sounds simple, but do they have ovens? Do they have some of the basic equipment that you're looking for? Or are you going to have to buy in equipment? I will say, I personally, when working in a shared kitchen space, I did have to buy in some equipment because I had some specialized equipment. But then I also made sure that I had space where that equipment could be stored and that equipment couldn't be used by other people, mainly for a health concern. I didn't want other products that I wasn't sure of running through that equipment. So that's the next thing is, you know, do you have space? Do you have refrigeration? Do you have dry storage? Do you have freezer space? And all of these kitchens are going to do it a little bit differently, unless it's your own kitchen, and then you get to make the rules. But if you're in an incubator kitchen or a shared kitchen space or renting somebody else's kitchen, some of that space may be included as part of your rent. Alternatively, there may be an additional fee. You know, for each rack of dry storage, it's going to be an extra $30 a month. So again, neither's right, neither's wrong. You just need to understand what all those costs are going to be so that you can build this into your business plan. Parking is a big one. You know, where is parking? Is it nearby? Is it free? Depending on your location, is it secure? That can also be a concern, you know, for some folks in cities, having secure parking, especially if you're going to be leaving late at night, if that's your access to the kitchen hours, you know, that may be a concern for you. The other reason that parking is something you want to think about is that if you are going to be, you know, bringing out multiple batches of stuff to take to FedEx to ship to buyers, if you're going to be bringing in that 50-pound bag of flour that you've just picked up at Costco, let's say in the beginning you're working with maybe with like a Costco as opposed to having a distributor sell to you, you don't want to have to be kind of humping that up the hill, you know, 4 blocks away to get to your kitchen space. So having that parking close by, because in a food business we are moving stuff around a lot. Especially, I will say, if you're hoping to go to farmers markets, huge asset to have parking nearby so that you can load everything in and out of your car or everything in and out of your truck. Again, you don't want to have to be kind of circling for parking and then parking 4 blocks away and trying to get all that stuff into the kitchen to get it cleaned at the end of a long farmers market day. And then again, depending on what your goals are, depending on what your business is, you know, does the facility have access for tractor trailers? So if you are planning to build this business up, you know, in a short time frame, but build it up quickly, you might need access to tractor trailers so that they can come and pick up pallets of product that you're shipping out, or that distributors can bring in ingredients for you. And so you want to make sure that there would be access for a tractor trailer to come in and either, you know, load product on or offload ingredients or packaging. So I want to kind of take a brief minute and just talk about food carts and food trucks, because there's a couple of you who are thinking about that. And so specifically when it comes to kitchen space and food trucks and food carts, usually in almost every case, I'll put it this way, I have not yet seen a case where it's not required. But it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, because everybody's different, and this is typically done on a county level or a city level. So typically a food truck or food cart is going to be required to operate out of a commissary kitchen. And what a commissary kitchen does is it is essentially a kitchen that enables you to do all your prep work, because you're not allowed to be doing your prep work typically on the truck. Usually you have to bring stuff into the truck, bring your ingredients into the truck as prepped as possible. Not only does it give you a place to prep ingredients, but it also gives you a place to store ingredients and store materials overnight. Especially anything refrigerated, a health department is typically not going to allow you to keep products that need to be refrigerated on a truck overnight, even if you have it hooked up to a generator. Usually they're going to want that going into a commercial fridge or freezer. The other, you know, the biggest difference between a commissary kitchen and a commercial kitchen is that a commissary kitchen has the ability to dispose of gray water from the truck. So that is, as you have the sink on the truck, you know, where is that water going? It has to go somewhere. So they usually have hookups to be able to do that. A lot of the commissary kitchens now also have, you know, propane hookups so that you can fill up the propane for your for the burner on the truck, and, you know, some of the other stuff. Now, there are commercial kitchens that can also operate as commissary kitchens. So it doesn't mean that commercial kitchens and commissary kitchens are always exclusively different, because there are commercial kitchens that do have the capability to take care of the gray water and or potentially help with the propane and some of the other needs for food trucks. So it's some of those things that you want to be looking for. Moving forward, just to talk about co-packers briefly, especially because we do have at least one person who initially is interested in working with a co-packer. And with co-packers, you can have small production co-packers. I was on the phone this morning with an entrepreneur who's creating a baked product. They're going to be working with a co-packer, and their co-packer literally is their local bakery. Their local bakery has some extra time, and so is going to be producing this product. And like, they have a specific baker who's going to be baking their product, and they know her name. So a co-packer can be as small as that, and that's a completely viable option. You know, especially again as you're building your business up, you may start out by producing it, let's say, in your home, move to a commercial kitchen, and then ultimately decide you want to work with a co-packer, but you're not yet doing sales volume enough to justify you going to a giant big co-packer. And so instead you might work with the local bakery, as an example, first of all, and then, you know, down the road move up to a bigger co-packer. So you do have small co-packers, and you've got bigger co-packers. And some of the benefits of co-packers is that it's going to take the production aspect off of your plate. Never forget, as a food entrepreneur, you've got a whole bunch of stuff going on. You've got all the marketing, all the accounting, all the production, all the sales. It goes on and on and on. And the packing and the shipping of the product. So a co-packer can take a big piece of that off your plate, and they typically are experts at that production piece. They're going to be able to streamline your production processes, make things go as quick as possible, and oftentimes they're going to be able to buy in ingredients in even bigger quantities or an even bigger bulk than you're buying, because usually co-packers, they're very niche focused, and so if they're producing your product, they're typically using those ingredients to produce other types of products in their facility as well. So whereas you might be buying in a 50-pound bag, well, because they have 4 clients, they would, and I'm just pulling numbers out of the air, but they would be buying in 200 pounds at a time. And so they're going to be able to get a price break on that. So as you think about working with co-packers, and there's a lot more information in this week's reading, one is, can they produce the product the way that you actually want it produced? And you need to go back and forth with them, and you need to do several test runs to make sure that the product meets your standards. And even once it starts to meet your standards, make sure that it continues to meet your standards down the road. You always want to know what the minimum run size is, especially as a smaller business just starting out. And minimum run size means what is the smallest quantity that they will produce for you. Because typically a co-packer, other than giving you the samples to taste, and as you guys are testing and working things out together, they're not going to allow you to call up and say, hey, I just need a dozen of this. They're going to have a minimum order run. So you might need to be able to plan in advance, though, and say, okay, well, their minimum order is 1,000 units. At what point in my inventory am I going to decide to place that order? Because you're going to have to pay for that order then. You want to understand where they're sourcing their ingredients from, if that's important to you. Alternatively, there are co-packers that you can work with where you source the ingredients, and you are actually getting the ingredients from your vendor to the co-packing facility. And then, does this co-packer have any certifications? One of the great things about working with a co-packer is they also take a lot of the health permitting stuff off of your plate, because they are facilities that are permitted to do this. And a lot of them are also, or not a lot, but several or many, co-packers have also gone through specific certifications, so that they might be organic, certified organic co-packers. They might be kosher co-packers. So if those certifications are important to you, you want to be looking for co-packers who already have those certifications in place. And then lastly, this number 5 about distribution, the question I'm asking here is, some co-packers have the ability to, after they produce, let's say, your 1,000 units, your minimum run, even though you've paid for it in advance, they actually have the ability to keep it in their warehouse and do what's known as pack and ship, which means that as you receive orders, they will send it out. So they will do all the packaging and they will do all the shipping for you. Obviously, that comes at an additional cost, so that's not free. But, that may mean that you don't have to rent storage space for the product. That may mean that you don't actually have to be the one who's physically shipping the product off and packing it into the boxes, or you don't have to hire somebody to do that. There's pros and cons on either side, and not every co-packer offers this. But if that sounds interesting to you, if you're looking at everything that you're going to have to be doing and thinking, okay, where can I kind of offload or outsource some of this to other experts to take care of, that might be one of those pieces that you want to be looking for. So there's a couple special considerations, and I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about this, especially because when we're talking about cheeses and meats, they are usually special considerations. They are usually going to have to be produced in very specific facilities that meet very specific requirements, and they are oftentimes going to need to have additional licensing as well. And as part of that licensing, they are usually, not always, all these conditionals, but they are usually also going to showcase or need to showcase that they have a HACCP plan in place. And a HACCP plan is a Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points plan. And that is where it is going to be looking for where might there be potential for food to become contaminated, and what are we doing to minimize that risk. Similarly, if you're thinking about producing a frozen, like an ice cream product or a popsicle product, there might be other permits that you're going to need to file as well. For ice cream, sometimes that is dependent on, are you producing the ice cream base yourself? So you're getting the milk from the farmer after it's pasteurized and you're producing the base, or are you buying the base from somebody else and then just adding in your flavors and your ingredients? Again, neither is right, neither is wrong, but depending on what you want to do, depending on what your business vision and your business concept is, you might need to file for additional permits. And the reason that these products, the meats and the cheeses and the frozen products fall under a little bit different regulations is because, these are products that have a higher chance of becoming contaminated. It doesn't necessarily mean that that they always do. I mean, they certainly don't actually, but there is a higher chance that they could become contaminated, and that is what the health departments and the Department of Ags are concerned about. Okay, so what permits are you going to need to operate your business? Well, it's kind of like, this entire seminar today is, I keep saying like, well, maybe, sort of, usually, typically. It's going to be dependent on what city you're in, what county you're in, what state you're in, what their laws are, as well as what food product you're producing or food products you're producing, and then also how you're planning to sell the product. So what channels you're planning to sell through. So, are you planning to be a food truck? Are you planning to sell at farmers markets? So unfortunately, there is no absolute for everyone that I can say applies to all of you. You are going to be responsible this week for finding out which permits. We'll walk through this really quickly, but for finding out which permits you're going to fall under. And I would say looked within the first year. I realize that a lot of you are thinking, this business is going to grow down the road. We're building this business plan for the first year. So look for the first year what health permits you are going to have to be able to legally operate your business and what those costs are. Typically, what you're looking at is as follows, but again, keep in mind it's highly dependent. So we're going to start over here on kind of the left-hand side with food handler. So usually there's going to have to be, and this typically applies to every type of food business and establishment. Some form of safe food handling permit or certification. Again, if you're working with meats, cheeses, there might be kind of a more advanced class or process that you have to go through, but almost everybody is going to have some type of food handling, safe food handling permit that's needed. Then, okay, if you're operating a cottage food business, in almost all states, it's actually not required in every state, but in almost all states, you're going to need to have a permit. Based on what I've researched, most of these permits are overseen by State Department of Ags and not necessarily your county health department, but that's not always the case. So if you're thinking about home-based food business, you want to be looking for, okay, what are the cottage food, the baker bill, what it's going to be required from a permitting standpoint. For most of the rest of you, assuming that you're not planning to start out as a home-based food business, if you're looking to work out of a commercial kitchen or of some type and let's say sell to farmers markets, if you're looking to operate your own restaurant or bakery, or some food truck, some way that you are selling direct to consumers, you are likely going to need a health permit from your city or county. Huge asterisk here being the cheese folks. So let's kind of cheese and meats, like you guys kind of move to the side for 1 second. But for the rest of you, you're usually going to have a county or a city health inspector come in to your premises and make sure that the products that you're producing are safe. Moving up from there, our food processor. So in some states, if you want to be selling wholesale, you might need to have some type of food processor permit or otherwise a kind of a Department of Ag permit that allows you to sell wholesale. Also, depending on what product that you are making, you might need to have a food processor's license as well in order to legally produce that food. So usually kind of your low acidified canned foods fall under this as well. Usually, not always. USDA license, based off of what I was reading from most of you, I don't believe that any of you fall currently under the USDA license. That is a good thing because that's a good thing because getting your USDA license is usually going to be about a year-long process that the USDA is set up to deal with big companies. They're not set up to deal with small companies. And from entrepreneurs I know who have worked with the USDA, typically you're looking at things like meat producers, jerky guys who are selling across state lines. That's the biggest group who falls under USDA once you cross that state line as a meat producer. So, if any of you are thinking of like making a bacon jam and selling it across state lines, you actually would need a USDA license. But the USDA is set up to deal with big guys. They're not highly responsive. A lot of the big companies, they actually have people on staff whose entire job is to be that go-between between the USDA and the company. And so as a small entrepreneur, it's very hard to try and keep up with what the USDA is going to be requiring. So if down the road you decide that you want to expand your product line, you want to be selling something that's going to require you to have a USDA license, I just encourage you to build in a long timeline and say, okay, I realize that this might take 9, 12, 15 months to actually get that license. So what am I going to be doing in my business in the meantime to make sure that I have the revenue that I'm hoping to have? And then lastly, you might need FDA oversight. FDA oversight is typically required, again, as we talk about, so FDA oversight is typically required when you're making a low acidified canned product. So something that doesn't have like a lot of sugar in it, that type of stuff. The FDA oversight, it sounds really scary. In these cases, it is typically more of a, hey, you just have to register that you are doing this with the FDA. And then as long as you have your other licenses and your other permits from state and county and whatnot, you're typically going to be okay. So I saw a couple questions come in. Let me just kind of stop here and answer a couple. Okay, so Tara, regulation related storage. In our case, we're having trouble finding rental space. If we could secure kitchen use at a community organization, would the product need to be stored there? We're concerned about security and adequate freezer temperature control. Great question, actually. I know you said you think I answered it, but let me actually talk about this a little bit more because you reminded me of another point. In most cases, if you are going to be operating out of like somebody else's kitchen, you are usually going to be required to have, let's say, your county health license yourself. So just because you're operating out of a bakery and that bakery already has their King County health permit, you as a separate business coming into that facility, and a separate tax ID and all that other good stuff, you are also usually going to be required to have your own separate health permit. Even if the inspectors have already come in and given the okay to that facility, same thing if you're working in a shared kitchen space or incubator kitchens, usually you are going to have to go in independently and have the space regulated. In terms of security and adequate temperature control, usually, and again, like I can't give 100% promises, but usually product is going to have to be kept on site unless you have another facility where and if you do have another facility, let's say that you're moving stuff to, you have freezer storage, the health department would actually have to go and inspect that as well to make sure that it was legal. And then they would also be asking you questions on, well, then how are you transporting this product from A to B to make sure that nothing bad is happening to the product in between. So in most cases, you're going to be required to keep product on site until it is shelf stable and ready to go. So in terms of security and adequate freezer control, the security issue is a big concern when you're sharing kitchen space, and it's something you should talk to the kitchen management about. And if you find that thefts are occurring, then you need to talk to that management about what you can do to secure that. There are certain, like you can get basically lock boxes that can go into commercial freezers, go into I can't think of the shelving that kind of every kitchen has, like the wire shelving that's used in a lot of kitchens. You can actually buy security boxes that will fit that space so that you can put your product, put your dry ingredients and whatnot in there and then lock it, and then you're the only one who has the key. The other thing that I've seen with when it comes to fridge and temperature control is that if it hasn't already been started in the kitchen, talk to management again and actually start a fridge and freezer log where that fridge and freezer is being checked multiple times during the day by the different entrepreneurs who are using it, and saying, okay, at this time the temperature was X. That's actually something that's going to be really helpful. If it's not mandated by your county health inspector or your food processor, your Department of Ag, usually it's something, it may not be mandated, but I will tell you if they walk in and they see that, it's going to give them a lot more comfort that you're making sure that the food products are being kept at a safe temperature. So that's a pretty easy thing that you can just print out. and just have stuck to the fridge and freezer, and then just talk to the other folks who are using those fridge and freezer and explain, the benefit of doing this, because it's keeping their food products safe as well. And then the question about license to produce cheese in Oregon. Do I need to have a USDA license to sell it in Washington? I honestly don't know the answer to that, but as I have mentioned to you, I have a very good friend who is in charge of the Washington Artisan Cheese Group. So I will actually direct her question to, or your question to her, and see about getting you an answer to that. So hopefully I'll be able to come back to an answer kind of within the next week about that, or at least come back with somebody that you can talk to about that more. Are there any other questions kind of up to this point? Okay. So the how piece of production, and posted some videos this week on the site about this. And again, this was based off of recommendations or, questions that you guys had been asking. In a nutshell, the how of production, it really comes down to being really, really well organized. How can you maximize your time in the kitchen? Even if it's your home kitchen and you're like, well, I'm not paying rent, I don't need to worry about maximizing my time. The reality is, as a food entrepreneur, your greatest asset is time. Because you are going to be wearing so many hats, because there's a million things that have to get done every day, and you're going to get like 3 of them done, trust me on this, and you're going to have this huge to-do list the next day. Maximizing your time and maximizing the time that you're spending in the kitchen is really important. And it really comes down to really solid organization, understanding what your steps and your processes are, understanding how you can move through those processes as quickly as possible while always keeping the quality of the product first and foremost. And also, how can you constantly be double working? How can, when something is in the oven or something is, simmering, what else can you be doing to prep and to be ready for the next step? For those of you who have worked in commercial kitchens before, you kind of like this gets ingrained in you a little bit. The ability to work quickly and efficiently in kitchens is something you figure out how to do. For those of you who aren't coming from a culinary background, like, don't worry, it's not hard to learn. It's not brain surgery. You will figure it out. And certainly if you have the ability to talk to other food entrepreneurs about some of the things that they're doing to work efficiently, I encourage you to maybe post something on the discussion board about that, so that some of your colleagues who do have culinary experience might be able to share their thoughts and insights. Other food entrepreneurs in your local community, if you're working in shared kitchen spaces, just talking to folks and figuring out, where can I streamline my process? So talking about our kind of our assignments this week. Oh, I want to mention one other thing that's important. It actually doesn't fall under the licenses and permits. This is why I have notes, so I remember this stuff. I want to talk about insurance really quickly. Liability insurance, small business insurance, that type of stuff. It is typically not going to be required by the state that you have liability insurance or small business insurance. However, if you are going to be leasing a kitchen, if you're going to be going into somebody else's kitchen, anything like that, if you're going to be selling wholesale, you are almost always going to be required to have some type of liability insurance, which will then, what happens is it helps protect you if somebody gets sick from your product or says they get sick from your product or somehow hurt, helps protect you from lawsuits. It's kind of a bad example. It's kind of like car insurance, where if somebody sues your business, there's a financial buffer between the person suing you and between your business finances. So the first $1 million would get paid out of your liability insurance. But also, kind of like car insurance, is that if somebody sues you, a good small business insurance company, well, they're not just going to leave it to you to fight it. They actually have people on their side, on their team, who are going to, attorneys who help you fight as needed or mediate or whatever needs to be done to come to a happy conclusion. And the benefit of small business insurance is, while it is required, like I said, if you go into other people's kitchens or if you're selling wholesale, so you might find yourself in a situation where it's required. But even if it's not required, it's an important piece to think about because it will help protect your business in case, in case something happens. And I always tell the story. I don't care how much, how much care you take for your product and your quality. The reality is you are getting ingredients from somebody else, and the way the food business works, as I've been told from attorneys, is that if you get spinach greens that have E. coli and somebody gets sick from eating your product that has the spinach greens, well, you are sued, the farmer is sued. It goes the entire way down the source chain. So everybody in that gets impacted. So it's not like you can just pass the buck and say, well, I did everything that I was supposed to be doing. It was the guy that I got the ingredients from. So small business insurance is something, again, if it's not going to be required of you, I really encourage you to think highly about it. I kind of brought up, like, if you're selling wholesale, you're going to need it, and that's because if you're selling wholesale, a small, tiny specialty mom and pop may not require this, but if you're, like, I promise you, if you're selling into a Whole Foods or, kind of the bigger natural food stores, if you're selling into any type of bigger supermarkets, if you're selling into catalogs, any of those guys, they are going to require you to have liability insurance, and then they are going to ask to be put as named as a additional insured on your insurance, and that helps protect them in case somebody gets sick from eating your product. If they bought it at ABC store, it helps protect ABC store. So liability insurance is something, it's very important. It's something you want to start looking into. And there's multiple forms of insurance. There's the liability insurance. There's if the kitchen burns down and you lose all of your lose all of your ingredients and the $10,000 of packaging that you just bought in, that you can get money back for that. So it's worthwhile to find an insurance agent or find an insurance broker who specializes in small businesses and start talking to them about what your options are. And as a quick note, what I just heard from another entrepreneur is she actually just found her insurance company by talking to her local bank. So she has chosen to open up her business account at it's a national branch. She's chosen to open it up at Wells Fargo. And in talking with their small business people, they happen to say, hey, we know some folks who do small business insurance and we can get you some quotes. So she wasn't necessarily expecting her local banker to be able to help her out with that, but that if you've chosen to open up a bank account in one location or with a certain firm, ask them, see if they know folks that are reputable. But as always, when it comes to insurance, you want to compare quotes. You want to understand everything that you are getting or not getting so that you can make an educated decision. So in terms of our assignments this week, our topics for the week, obviously, and the assignments for the week really fall into kind of the three main buckets that we've been discussing tonight. So from a business licensing standpoint, this week you are being asked to share your business name in a discussion, and then even more importantly, to share feedback with one another on that name. Please remember that what we're trying to do is actually help all of us grow stronger businesses, so adding constructive comments, will really help your other entrepreneurs. So I'm sure I don't need to say this, but obviously we're looking for constructive comments. We're not looking for anybody who's going to, slam somebody else or slam a name or an idea. By the same token, if you receive constructive comments, realize that they have come from a place of trying to be constructive and helpful. And so even if it may be a little bit hurtful to you, oftentimes we're so close to our concept and we're so in love with a certain name or an idea because it means something to us that it may hurt to have somebody say something that you don't like to hear. But oftentimes, because we're so close, we're a little bit blind to potential issues. And this is where having somebody else come in who's fresh, who hasn't heard of it, might be able to provide you with a little bit of feedback and insight. And that's really important because, your customers are going to be new to this idea or new to this name as well. So you want it to be something that's going to resonate positively with them. You're also being asked on the discussion board to talk about what type of production facility you're going to be working in. So is it a home-based kitchen, commercial kitchen, co-packer, etc., that you plan to work out of for at least the first year. As far as assignments to turn into me, I'm asking you to research and submit a summary of the business licenses that you're going to need, as well as the health permits that you're going to need for your business, based off of your business concept and your business location, within that first year, as well as the associated costs for applying for those permits. Well, it's not required. One of the things, and this was based off of the production or the questions about the how of production, one of the things that I have uploaded onto the site is a cost, pricing, and production worksheet. We are going to be building off of this significantly as we move into the financial component of this course. But what you can do now, it's not a requirement for this week, but I encourage you, if you find yourself with some extra time, download that workbook and start working through it. There's an instructional video that tells you kind of what you need to be thinking of, what you need to be doing for this first phase of the workbook. Start inputting your recipes as it's outlined. This is going to help you basically get ahead as we start to move towards the financial component coming up, but it's also going to give you an idea, like, okay, it's going to make you stop and think, like, well, what are my steps? What are my processes? You know, now is the time I need to start narrowing down what I think my recipes are going to be. I'm really fine-tuning those. You know, ultimately, we are really trying to work towards getting you to having, you know, a fully fleshed out, finished, ready to go business by the time that we're done with this course. Then the last thing that I want to mention really quickly, and then I will let all of you go because I know that I'm up on my time. So I decided this week, I've given you a couple extra hours to complete the assignments and the discussions and everything because the reality is by Sunday night at 9 o'clock, I realized that no matter what you had turned in, it wasn't like at 9:01 I was going to sit down and have a fresh mind and be able to start looking at stuff and giving you constructive feedback. So I've extended it to midnight so that by the time I'm up Monday morning, and I get up freakishly early, so by the time I'm up Monday morning, I can actually start fresh with everything. So I figured there was no reason for you to lose an extra couple of hours. So you've got a couple extra hours every week to finish up the homework. And then lastly, with regards to homework and assignments, everybody who turned stuff in, you should have received feedback from me. I know there was a couple questions that folks had that what I did is I actually made notes on everything that, in kind of my thoughts and my some of the insight that I wanted to share, and then I put that in a document and emailed that back to you one-on-one. If you didn't receive that, let me know because I want to make sure that you have that feedback. You don't have to necessarily like make corrections right now and then turn it back in, but I want you to be thinking about some of the notes that I made and some of the feedback that I gave you, because ultimately we are going to be in this first 4 weeks kind of designing the business overview piece of the business plan, and I will be looking when you turn in that final project. At the end of our 4 weeks here, first 4 weeks, I am going to be looking to say, okay, did you actually, add in some of these pieces that I was talking about? Have you thought through these pieces? Are you showcasing that you're thinking through these pieces that I raised initially? So, kind of keep that in the back of your mind. If you have time, you yourself might want to go through and kind of make some revisions. But ultimately, it's not something that you're never going to look at again. It is going to be coming back in the final project. So let's see, a couple questions. Oh, thank you, Natasha. Natasha, I'm sure all of you guys remember that she is an attorney, and so good to know that, yeah, everyone in the chain, that's the word I was looking for, everyone in the chain is liable. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Okay, so when we share our business name, should we also share our logo if we have one? I would love it. Go for it. I mean, we will be talking about logos and branding and stuff later, but the more feedback we can start giving now, the better, especially because we do have this break, this kind of summer break, if you will. That gives you time to make revisions over the summer and then kind of showcase it again as we talk about marketing in the fall. So please do share your business name, share logo. Again, I remind everybody that what's being shared on these discussion boards is confidential. And let's see. I kind of feel I'm like 7:12. I'm like right up to my hour. Are there any questions that anybody has or anything that I can help anybody with? Is everybody good? I know I'm throwing a lot of material at you in the first couple weeks. Starting next week, we are going to start talking starting next week, we're going to start to narrow in a little bit. These first 2 weeks, there's just a lot going on as I want to kind of get a lot of this red tape out of the way in terms of what licenses, what permits. Starting next week, we're going to really start taking a look at who the target market is, who your competitors are, SWOT analysis, all of that stuff. And then in the fourth week, we're going to take a look at packaging and what you need to know about packaging. And I have scheduled a kind of a guest speaker who has a lot of experience with this, both lessons learned and positive outcomes. And so she's going to be sharing her experiences with you in the live webinar or the live seminar that we do kind of the fourth week of this class. So if there's no questions, I will let all of you get on to your Wednesday evening. I hope everybody has a great evening. As always, feel free to reach out to me with any questions. And to those of you that I haven't had a chance to have office hours with yet, I definitely look forward to talking to you one-on-one soon. So thank you so much. Have a great night, guys. Bye.